think you see reality, but most of what you call seeing is your brain negotiating with your mood, your habits, and other people's expectations. Highly disciplined minds do something almost unfair. They notice the negotiation happening in real time and they refuse to sign the contract. Quick thing before we go deeper. We are building toward 1,000 subscribers, and your subscription genuinely helps us reach more people who actually want the real mechanisms, not the recycled slogans. And if this hits a nerve, tap like too, because that tiny signal tells the algorithm this is worth distributing. Now let me set the frame, because if you miss this, everything else sounds like motivational noise. Discipline is not just willpower. It is not even primarily about doing hard things. It is a perceptual skill. You have felt the opposite of it. Days where the world looks heavy, people look irritating, time feels scarce, and your own thoughts sound like facts. That is not you being weak. That is your perception being run by the fast system that prioritizes comfort and social safety over accuracy. Most people never notice that their attention is being auctioned off moment by moment. Disciplined minds notice the auction. And that single difference changes what reality looks like. Here is the first non-obvious thing. Highly disciplined minds do not experience urges as commands. They experience urges as weather. Think about this for a second. When you feel a pull to procrastinate, or to check your phone, or to eat, or to argue, it does not arrive in your mind labeled temporary sensation. It arrives dressed up as a reasonable story. I need a break. This will only take a second. I deserve this. They need to hear this. That story is the brain trying to turn a state into a policy. The mechanism behind this is predictive processing. Your brain is not a camera, it is a prediction engine. It constantly guesses what you will do next, and then it generates feelings that help make the guess come true. An urge is not just desire, it is a prediction plus energy. It is the brain saying, this is the behavior we usually run when we feel this internal state. Discipline at the perceptual level is the ability to see the urge as a forecast, not a verdict. The disciplined mind recognizes my brain is proposing an action plan because it wants to reduce uncertainty and return to a familiar pattern. That is why disciplined people can look calm while doing something uncomfortable. They are not superhuman. They are just not confusing internal weather with external reality. Now here is where it gets interesting. This changes how they perceive time. Most people experience time emotionally. 2 hours of focused work can feel like an eternity, and 2 hours of scrolling can disappear. Disciplined minds reverse that. They start perceiving time structurally, like an engineer, not emotionally like a passenger. Let me show you what I mean. When you sit down to do a hard task, the first thing your brain does is estimate the cost. Not the real cost, the perceived cost. It looks for signals: uncertainty, complexity, risk of failure, risk of embarrassment, boredom. Those signals inflate the predicted effort. The task feels bigger than it is. Highly disciplined minds have trained a specific perception. They separate the task from the entry fee. The entry fee is the first 3 to 8 minutes where the brain is still protesting. They know that the felt resistance is front-loaded, so they do not interpret resistance as evidence the task is wrong. They interpret resistance as evidence they have just reached the gate. Notice the pattern here. Average minds ask, do I feel like doing this? Disciplined minds ask, what will I feel like after the first 5 minutes? That is a different relationship with time. It is the difference between living inside the moment and managing the transition between moments. And there is a neuroscience clue here. The anterior cingulate cortex, a region involved in conflict monitoring, lights up when you do something that contradicts your default impulse. With repetition, that conflict becomes less expensive. But what people miss is that the mind begins to perceive conflict as information rather than pain. The presence of friction becomes a compass. This is the edge of my pattern. So reality for them contains more edges, more decision points, more moments that other people do not even register because they slide through them automatically. Now, second major insight, and this is the one that makes disciplined people seem almost cold from the outside. They do not treat their thoughts as witnesses. They treat their thoughts as suspects. Most people assume their inner narration is reporting the world, but the inner narration is doing public relations for your current identity. It is constantly protecting a self-image: competent, good, consistent, wronged, special, misunderstood, and whatever. Highly disciplined minds have learned something subtle. The brain lies most convincingly when it is trying to preserve status. Status in the social sense, yes, but also status inside your own mind. The feeling of being the kind of person who is in control. So disciplined people develop what I call epistemic hygiene. They clean inputs and they downgrade unreliable signals. They ask, what is the incentive behind this thought? Because thoughts have incentives. A thought can be trying to get you comfort, or excuse, or revenge, or validation. It can be trying to get you to avoid the shame of starting something you might not finish. Here is a concrete example you will recognize. You plan to wake up early. Your alarm goes off. Immediately you get a thought. Sleep is important. 1 more hour will make me healthier. That thought sounds responsible, but notice the timing. The thought does not arrive at noon when you could take a nap. It arrives at the exact moment where there is a conflict between your plan and your comfort. A disciplined mind does not argue with the thought. They do not debate it like it is a philosopher. They label it by function. This is a conflict reduction thought. Then they act first and let the mind catch up. Now watch what happens when you apply this to social reality. This is the part people rarely talk about. Most people are unconsciously tuned to the social cost of being different. So their perception of reality is filtered through what will people think, even when nobody is watching. That creates a strange distortion. You start living in a crowd that is not physically there. Highly disciplined minds perceive social pressure as a background signal, not a steering wheel. They still care about people, but they do not let imagined observers edit their behavior. And because of that, they see the world more directly, less performatively. This is why disciplined people often seem quieter, not because they have fewer thoughts, but because they are not constantly negotiating identity in public. They are not always proving, they are doing. Stay with me, because the next layer connects these two: urges as weather and thoughts as suspects. And it explains something you have probably noticed but could not name: why discipline changes what feels real. Third insight: highly disciplined minds perceive reality at the level of systems, not events. An undisciplined mind lives event to event. I had a good day. I had a bad day. I messed up. I am back on track. It feels dramatic, like weather in a small country. A disciplined mind zooms out. They perceive themselves as an environment: sleep, food, media, relationships, schedule design, friction, cues, defaults. They pay attention to inputs the way a programmer watches a system for bugs. Let me show you the hidden mechanism. Human behavior is not primarily driven by conscious choice. It is driven by cue-response loops. The basal ganglia, habit circuitry, is basically an automation engine. It does not care about your goals. It cares about repetition and reward. So the disciplined person does not rely on heroic decision-making. They shape the cue field. They do not ask, how do I resist temptation? They ask, why is temptation constantly being served to me on a tray? That is a different perception of the room you are in. Most people see a kitchen. Disciplined minds see an architecture of triggers. Most people see a phone. Disciplined minds see a variable reward machine designed to condition attention. Now here is the uncomfortable part. When you start perceiving systems, you also start seeing how often your preferences were engineered. Not by a conspiracy, but by incentives. Apps, food companies, social norms, even your workplace culture. They all compete to shape your default settings. This is why discipline often comes with a kind of existential clarity. You realize how much of your life was running on external programming, and you cannot unsee it. Midpoint shift, because I want to flip the entire story you might be telling yourself. People think disciplined minds perceive reality more rigidly, like they are controlling everything. It is the opposite. They perceive reality more flexibly because they are less attached to any single interpretation. Here is the deeper layer most people miss. Discipline is not control of behavior, it is control of meaning. Meaning is the silent lever. If discomfort means danger, you avoid it. If discomfort means growth, you move toward it. If boredom means waste, you escape it. If boredom means depth loading, you stay. Highly disciplined minds have trained themselves to change the meaning of sensations, not with affirmations, but with repeated evidence. They repeatedly do the thing, survive it, and watch the catastrophic story fail to come true. Over time, the brain updates its predictions. The sensation changes flavor. The same effort feels different. This is why discipline can look like fearlessness. It is not fearlessness. It is a different semantic label on the same physiological signals. Your heart races, your stomach tightens, your mind tries to flee. Most people call that I cannot. Disciplined minds call that activation. There is actual research adjacent to this. Reappraisal, one of the most effective emotion regulation strategies, changes the relationship between prefrontal regions and the amygdala. But what is rarely emphasized is that reappraisal is easier when your identity is not fused to the emotion. If you think I am anxious, then anxiety is you. If you think anxiety is a prediction signal in my body, then you can work with it. So disciplined perception is diffusion. You are not your thoughts. You are not your urges. You are not even your current mood. You are the system that can notice them. Now, a practical manifestation you can test today. Watch the moment you are about to break a commitment. There is always a perceptual distortion right before the break. Your mind zooms in. It collapses the timeline. It makes the immediate relief feel huge and the future cost feel abstract. Disciplined minds have a counter-perception. They simulate forward automatically. Almost like a chess player, they do not moralize. They do not say, I should. They simply see the next 3 moves. If I do this now, I become the kind of person who does this. Then tomorrow I will negotiate again. Then the habit becomes the baseline. They perceive identity as a lagging indicator of repeated choices, not a personality trait. Notice how different that is from typical advice. Typical advice says, be strong. This says, see the chain. And here is another counterintuitive detail. Disciplined people often trust themselves less, not more. They assume their future self will be tired, distracted, and biased. So they build guardrails. They pre-commit. They reduce options. They do not keep tempting food around. They put websites behind blockers. They schedule training with someone else. That is not weakness. That is accurate self-modeling. Okay, let me tie everything into one unified model, because otherwise it is just interesting facts. Highly disciplined minds perceive reality through what I call the 3-layer lens: signal, story, and system. Signal is the raw data. Sensations, urges, emotions, fatigue, hunger, arousal. The disciplined mind can feel the signal without immediately turning it into a command. Story is the interpretation, the narration that explains the signal. I need this. This is unfair. I cannot focus. I work better under pressure. Disciplined minds treat stories as hypotheses, not truths. They ask what the story is trying to protect. System is the environment and loops that produce the signal and story. Sleep debt, dopamine patterns, social reinforcement, friction design, habit triggers, identity payoffs. Disciplined minds default to system-level fixes because system fixes outlast mood. Here is the payoff. When you use this lens, you stop arguing with yourself all day. You stop taking the bait of every inner sentence. You do not need to win debates in your head. You just need to correctly classify what is happening. You feel an urge. That is signal. Your mind says, do it now. That is story. You notice you are tired and your phone is within reach, and you have trained your brain to escape boredom with novelty. That is system. And once you see system, you can change reality without drama. This is also why disciplined people look like they have high self-respect. They do, but it is built differently. It is not based on always feeling confident. It is based on making agreements with themselves and keeping enough of them that their brain starts believing their own plans. One last twist, because it completes the opening claim. When you perceive reality this way, you start seeing how many people are not reacting to the world, but to their internal model of the world. They are in arguments with ghosts. They are chasing relief, not outcomes. They are defending stories and are not solving problems. And if you have ever felt like you see something others miss, this is probably it. You are noticing the layer beneath behavior, perception. So here is my challenge for the next 24 hours. Pick one moment of friction, just one. When you feel resistance, do not ask, how do I motivate myself? Ask, is this a signal, a story, or a system? Name it. Then act on the layer that is actually real. If this changed how you see discipline, tell me in the comments what layer you get trapped in most often. Signal, story, or system. Because once you can name the lens you are using, you stop being controlled by it. And that is what it means to see reality clearly.